Let the scriptures speak for themselves.
So let's jump on to, unless there's anything else you have to throw in about Daniel 7, I'd love to jump to the 70 weeks prophecy, if that's cool with you.
Sure, yeah.
Daniel 9:24, so through 20:27. So this is probably, I would say, one of the most challenging, at least in the Old Testament prophecies, to interpret. But on this passage, I'd love to, we could talk forever about that. I don't want to do that to you or to our listeners, but I'd love to talk about the timestampness of the prophecy here. And then for me, in my understanding, the few things that are in here that aren't linked to time necessarily. So in short, the way I understand it is we have this clear 77s or 70 weeks or 70 Shabuas, however you would say it. These 77s, you have it linked. It's all linked in time. It's clearly a prophecy that is time dependent. It's made in time. It's made to begin in time and to end in time. It's not arbitrary, and I don't know that it could really be stretched out unless God brought us further revelation, kind of like when we get here with Jeremiah, right? In the prophecies of Jeremiah, there's 70 years, and Daniel's reading this in the book of Daniel, and Daniel understands that the 70 years is coming to an end, so he begins to pray, and then God says, no, I'm going to extend that. But it's recorded scripture, so if we had another revelation from God, that extended that, maybe we could, right, have some justification, but that never happened, right? There is no Daniel 2 or book 2 or, whatever. But I'd love to talk about that because in my understanding of this 70 weeks prophecy, it's that most of it is stamped in time. The only section of this that I would say is not linked to that, I guess what it would be 490 something years. It's been a while. 493, I believe, is the 69 and then something like that. But anyways, is the part of the destruction of the temple. And the way I understand it is all that was time-stamped was fulfilled, except for maybe the exception of the destruction of the temple that was to be built, the third temple. And then when Jesus shows up as the anointed one, as the one who was prophesied, then when he shows up, he predicts in his lifetime with the Olivet Discourse the rest of Daniel's prophecy that wasn't fulfilled, which is that of the destruction of the temple. So anyways, you could agree or disagree or whatever. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the...
No, I think if I'm understanding what you said correctly, that I agree with that. So the interesting things here for me when I finally started to understand this passage was we have to realize first that it talks about the 70 weeks in verse 24. And then in verse 26, it talks about 62 weeks.
Yep, 62 weeks.
Or in verse 25, the 7 weeks, the 60, and the 2 weeks. That's 69 weeks. So
right.
All but one, right? And so it's all about this 69-week period, really.
Sure.
And so, I can't remember which scholar, was it Usher or one of these guys that did that mathematics and figured that from the giving of this prophecy to about the time of the end of this 490-year period was literally the day almost that Jesus walked into the temple and they were waving the palm branches, right?
Yeah, so there's two places. People either I'm agnostic on this issue. I'm really not sure. I haven't had the time for the research, but people either date it with the very event that you mentioned when it's called the triumphal entry of Christ on the back of a donkey or foal. The only other place I've seen people date it is at his baptism, but with John the Baptist. But that's the only two. But that's where everyone. Yeah.
And to me, either one works fine. Doesn't affect the prophecy at all. Now, the thing that's interesting is that I still actually do believe there's a gap between that 69 weeks or 460. Whatever I said. What did I say?
490, something like that. Whatever 70 times
the final week not being accounted for in this passage, right? And so I do believe there's a break. There's a gap. And that 40-year gap is the 40 years between Jesus' ascension and essentially 70 AD. I believe and some people differ on this, and I'm not going to come down hard, but I truly believe that the last week is the 3.5 years before and the 3.5 years after 70 AD, destruction of the temple. And that's because the 70 weeks, it says in verse 24, are determined for the holy people and the holy city to finish their transgression and make an end of their sins.
Yeah.
And if you know what happened in the first 3.5 years before 70 AD is the tribulation period. They were really persecuted during that time.
Right.
And then the second one, right after that, what happened exactly 3.5 years after the temple being destroyed? Do you know that in history?
I don't know. I know
the Romans
the ending
chased.
of
They chased the rest of the Jewish zealots up to Masada, the mountain fortress of Masada, and exactly 3.5 years after, they finished them off. Done.
Yeah, I've been there. I actually got the opportunity to go there, and we talked through how they killed themselves. They killed their families. It was a mass suicide. And then you can actually still to this day, I probably showed it in a video somewhere, hopefully, but you can see the ramp that the Romans built to conquer it. They had such a hard time. It's an interesting war story. It really is, how they went about starving them out. But yeah, that's what I thought. I wasn't as sure. But it lines up.
There's all that. And then the other thing I think about this passage I just want to mention before we move on is when I realized that most people see this phrase in verse 26, the people of the prince that shall come, which I think is correctly identified. And I wouldn't call it the Antichrist, but the beast. It's the beast from the New Testament, from Revelation.
Yeah.
And the problem is that people use that prepositional phrase, the subject of that prepositional phrase, and use it in the next part, which it says, he shall confirm the covenant for 1 week. They think the beast is going to do those things, but that's not what's being said. The subject in all of this, starting from verse 25, is the Messiah, the Prince.
Yeah, right.
And so when I realized that, and that, wow, then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and the people of the prince, the beast, will come and destroy the city. That's fine. The people of the Roman soldiers did that.
Yeah.
And the end will be with the flood, desolations, and he will confirm the covenant. Well, that's still Jesus, because he's still the subject.
Yeah, that's right.
He will confirm the covenant for 1 week, for 1 week, and in the midst he will cause it to cease. That's 70 AD. There's no more after 70 because the temple is gone. And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, okay. So before I thought that this was the Antichrist, and that's what everyone always taught me.
Right.
Well, it's, he's going to be the world leader. He's going to have been wounded and come back to life. And he's going to make a covenant with Israel for a week. And then in the middle, he's going to break it. Right. That's all the future is teaching. Right. But this is God's doing. This is not the beast doing.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
So that was another thing. When I saw that and realized it, I was like, man, now this is making some sense. Right.
Yeah.
Because who ends the covenant? Who ends the covenant in 70 AD? God puts an end to the old covenant, the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah. It
no longer is in force. The Jews are confused nowadays. The modern Jews, they're all confused.
Yeah.
And they're it's just, to me, that became so clear and helped me so much with this passage. So,
yeah. And I'd love to bounce this off. You don't have to agree with this, but the other side of this that I've heard is that if you date the 70th week starting at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, and again, I'm not super familiar with timetables, so forgive me, but then his 3.5 year ministry or 3 year ministry would be the first half of that 70th week. And then after some people would date the covenant being brought to an end at the crucifixion. And then that last of that 3.5 years would be him. So throughout the entire 1 week, so like getting specific with the verses, verse 24, 70 weeks have been determined to put an end to rebellion, bring sin to completion, atone for iniquity, bring in perpetual righteousness, seal up prophetic vision. So many would say the 70 weeks is in the lifetime of the Messiah. And I'm not saying this to argue. I'm saying so that people listening that one of the two ways really that people interpret this, one of it is like in the lifetime of Jesus, and one is within the destruction of the temple. But they would say that like it ended with the crucifixion, and then you have the verse 25 prophecy of the destruction of the temple, and then the second temple, and then this is really meaty text here. And then for the verse 27, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, would date that from the beginning of his ministry to then after the 3 years following his death and resurrection, with because it's Jerusalem that is in the mind of Daniel. The prophecy is concerning Jerusalem. And if you remember the teaching of Jesus, it's that they were first to go to Jerusalem and then to Judea and the rest of the world, right? And so the apostles, many would line up the book of Acts, starting with Paul's vision and like conversion and sending out to the Gentiles right at the end of 3.5 years after the death of Jesus. So again, I don't know. I haven't done the volumes of research I need to do to come down on positions on all these things, but I thought it was another interesting idea that, maybe, of course, as Hebrews tells us, Jesus' death ends that covenant. But we at least, whether it's ended at the crucifixion or at the temple, it ended one of the two places, for me, in my understanding, and to try and stretch it out, I think just mars this text, it just you almost have to, I don't know. It's like a free for all, like at least, try to tie it to the verses somehow, but people just end up stretching it out to who knows where, so.
Yeah, no, to me, again, that some inordinate amount of time slammed in here, to me, destroys the validity of it, and the usefulness of the prophecy. What use is it to Daniel or anyone? And he was told at the end of this book, seal it up. So let's say he sealed it up, and that was held by the Jews and not opened until closer to when Christ came. Well, if they then opened it and found, oh, wait, there's 2,000 years left to go, what would that have meant to them? Like, that's useless, right? There's nothing there for them. So, I think you're right. I think you're right on that. We have to be very, just use some common sense and come to it with new eyes, I think too helps.
Yeah. And another thing I was thinking of is it's interesting that the ending of Daniel, and we'll close out this section talking about Daniel, but the ending of Daniel, there's a certain part of that same story that the angel is describing them in visions and interpreting for Daniel, that he says, nope, this last part, seal it up. Seal it up. Don't tell them. And then we get to the book of Revelation. Revelation in Greek, it's the apocalypse. It means the unveiling, the revealing, right? And we get to it, and it's like, here it is. Go tell the world. Don't keep it to yourself.
That's right. Don't seal it.
Yeah, and for me, it's like after I've read through Daniel and exhaustively studied it, and then read through the Olivet Discourse and exhaustively studied that, I haven't exhaustively studied Revelation. I've been dabbling in it, reading it multiple times and all that, and I'm not that comfortable with it yet, but I can't stop thinking about Daniel. I'm like, man, all this stuff. I mean, it's if you know Daniel and know it well, I don't know how I'd have to turn my brain off to read Revelation and not see all of this in there,
Oh yeah.
So.
Well, you're in the same place I was. It's like I did the same thing after I had beat Daniel to death on that vacation that I took. Then I was like, at some point I was like in the back of my head, oh boy, at some point I got to touch Revelation here. That's going to be tough. I knew it, but it's but I think, coming at Revelation with that understanding in your mind, it's got to be forefront of your mind, is like the people reading this needed it at that time.
Yeah, that's right.
So why did they need this? And so when you're reading it, it's like, how does this help them understand what was happening? Because they were in the middle of it, right? So that is very important when you go to Revelation.
Yeah, I would love to do like a parody of Revelation and interpret it by saying, and opening the beginning and say to the 7 cities in 21st century North America, and but that's not right. That's not how it's introduced. But anyways,
no.